This lecture will focus on the evolution of human behavior and human behavioral ecology. So the question we're going to start off with is, does our evolutionary history influence our behavior? Are such behaviors driven by evolutionary fitness? This is basically the driving force of all the animal behaviors that we've talked about this semester. Do they still interact in our modern day societies today? Alternatively, are our actions in part, at least, the consequence of what is sometimes referred to as the ghost of selection past? In other words, have our behaviors evolved in the context of, say, a hunter-gatherer society, and we still may retain some of these behaviors because of the past selection for those behaviors in a completely different ecological system? And in this regard, they may be considered as vestigial behaviors. An alternative view espoused by some is that our behaviors are simply a result of our modern culture. Are we at this state above evolutionary influences? And as we're going to discuss, there's probably some of each in most cases. Let's first address some of the criticisms of human behavioral ecology research. Sometimes you'll hear phrases such as, humans don't do things so we can increase our fitness. And that may be true. It may not be conscious that we're trying to achieve those goals. But again, we don't need to be conscious of the motives of our behaviors. That was true of all of the examples we've talked about in this semester. If organisms do some behavior, whether they're conscious of it or not, the fitness consequences of that will determine the direction of evolution of those behaviors. And behaviors evolve when these proximate triggers of behavior are, or at least were, linked to some ultimate adaptive reward. So sexual attraction to individuals with certain traits may have led to higher fitness, and whether you're conscious of that or not, if it improved your fitness and there was a genetic basis for those behaviors, that behavior will increase in frequency. Another statement sometimes heard is not all human behaviors are adaptive. But that's actually true of any animal. Some behaviors adaptive in the past may be maladaptive in the modern context. So our taste for alcohol, fats, carbohydrates were adaptive in the past in a hunter-gatherer society when you found these relatively rare resources. Optimal foraging, if it's driven by caloric gain, these were the sought-after products. And now they're just very readily available in modern society, and so our taste specifically for these can drive bad diets that can lead to negative health. So they were adaptive in the past, but if they're not checked in modern society, they can be maladaptive in the current context. Also, modern culture has modified behaviors to fit other ultimate goals besides fitness. So fitness may not be the driving force in the lives of most individuals. And that can explain things like birth control and celibacy associated with individuals who are trying to balance a career and family and regulate when they have fitness and when they have maximum production of income and a rewarding career. Some argue that human sociobiology is politically dangerous and fear that data could be used to support racist agendas in things like eugenics, trying to breed a master race or try to limit the reproduction of individuals with certain characteristics. There's also a fear that the data could be used to defend bad behavior, such as male aggression, dominance, and rape. Here's a book that came out fairly recently trying to understand the natural history of rape in a variety of animals and trying to understand how that can give us a better understanding for the occurrence of rape in humans. I think this is a very valuable approach. It may allow us to kind of recognize some of the warning signs and try to limit the potential situations in which rape occurs. Others take what I think is a more simplistic view of this issue, and they say, oh, you're just trying to say it's in our genes and we can't help it, we were evolved to be this way, and you're giving an excuse to rapists. Don't blame the caveman. Individuals should be responsible for their own actions. And nobody is saying that. Nobody is saying that this should be an excuse to commit these crimes. So let's try to address a fairly straightforward question first. Why do we donate blood? Is this a pure altruistic act, or do donors actually get some kind of benefit from this? Well, individuals do increase their recognition as charitable individuals when they donate blood, and this could increase their status or reputation. There are data to support this. Individuals tend to tell others that they gave their donation. As a matter of fact, blood donation services hand out T-shirts and stickers to indicate, hey, look at me, I'm a good individual, I gave blood, look at me in a favorable light. Individuals that don't give blood, they're not advertising that. And as a matter of fact, most individuals that don't give blood trying to sneak under the radar, hide that fact. So, do philanthropic individuals end up getting reward in some way? Well, they are more likely to eventually receive rewards themselves in a couple of venues. Business owners can attract new customers in this way. Politicians like to show their philanthropy so that they can try to attract votes. So in this regard, philanthropy, blood donation, other types of donation could be thought of as a form of reciprocal altruism. Now I'd like to spend a little bit more time talking about the topic of adaptive mate preferences in humans. And let's first look at it from the male perspective. From a male's perspective, are attractive women the most fertile women? This would make sense if fitness was driving mate choice in humans. Alternatively, are our preferred female traits arbitrary and simply the result of modern cultural pressures? Is there something besides fitness driving mate attraction from the male perspective? Well, there is evidence for the former. So if you look at the estradiol concentrations in women, basically a measure of their fertility, and you see how that correlates to women with different physical characteristics, women that have narrow waists and large breasts are the individuals with the highest estrus levels. And arguably of these four categories here, these are typically the traits that males are most interested in a woman. The odor of women during their ovulatory versus their non-ovulatory phase also varies. And there was a study in which women were given T-shirts and they wore them during their ovulatory phase, and men were given a variety of T-shirts from a variety of women and asked to rank the different T-shirts based on their odor. And the T-shirts worn by women in their ovulatory phase were ranked high and sometimes described as more pleasant smelling, sexy smelling, compared to T-shirts worn by the same women during their non-ovulatory phase. Facial appearance has subtle variation in the ovulatory and the non-ovulatory phase. So here are composites of 10 women actually in their ovulatory and non-ovulatory phase, and men were given a paired choice to choose the most attractive women in a variety of circumstances or a variety of pairs like this. And in most cases, males chose the photograph that was associated with the female in the ovulatory phase. And in this pair right here, that represents the figure in the left. Now let's look at adaptive female mate preferences in females. Do attractive men have good genes or some other indication of their overall health? And if so, what could be a physical feature that would correlate with that? Well, there's been a lot of research on symmetry, facial symmetry. In the example here where the photographs have been modified to produce symmetrical and asymmetrical faces, again, when given a choice, females tend to prefer the more symmetrical faces. And this makes sense because individuals that are challenged during development oftentimes develop asymmetrical features if they're in low genetic quality or if they have low food reserves. Individuals that are in better shape, that have better genetic control of their development, tend to produce more symmetrical features. So there's some indication that females may be looking for honest signals of male quality, genetic quality, or physical fitness. Alternatively, are signs of wealth and social status more important to females in mate choice? So what could be correlated with dominance and high testosterone levels in males? Well, prominent features like a prominent chin and cheekbones, strong upper body. So again, in paired comparisons, if given a choice between these two figures, females tend to pick the figures that are more masculine, like the one here on the left. And of these two, features that attempt to address the male's genetic quality or health versus his social status and dominance, it appears that the latter is more important in most females, that signs of wealth and status are more important. But interestingly, in these studies, it's been shown that the females are not always picking the most extreme morphology, so the most dominant image, for example. So in the three images here, going left to right, going less dominant to more dominant, females, when asked to pick the most dominant picture, would pick the one on the right. But if they were asked to pick the most attractive image, they pick one that's intermediate, that shows masculine features but is not the most dominant individuals. And this also makes sense when we're going to talk a little bit later about some potential sexual conflict between males and females. An overly dominant individual may have high social status among competing males, but could also become violent with regard to their females. And so that may detract from the females wanting to pick the most dominant image. Now, picking males based upon their social status makes sense. Good hunters or wealthy men in many societies are shown to have higher rates of extrapair fertilization, in addition to being more attractive to finding their own mates. And the number of potential conceptions is also correlated to males' income, especially males that are older. So here we see a correlation between the number of potential copulations and income, and there's a very high correlation for males in their 40s. In both males and females, self-perception has an important aspect of mate preference, and this represents a conditional mating strategy. So females were asked to self-rate their attractiveness, either in low, average, or high. They all preferred symmetrical faces, all above 50%, as you can see here. But those individuals that rated themselves the most attractive were much more picky and more likely to be very picky in wanting the most symmetrical faces, less so in the low to average self-rated attractiveness categories. So this sets up a situation of positive assortative mating. So a female's overall self-perception is positively correlated to the female's overall mate preference. And you can see that this is more of a curvilinear relationship, so that as again you get to the self-perception higher categories, there's a faster rate of increase in the female's preference. And the same pattern is seen for males, but notice that the line for the females is higher than the line for the males, indicating, as we've talked throughout the semester, that females are more choosy in mate choice. Well, now let's talk about sexual conflict of interest between males and females. 83% of pre-industrialized societies sanctioned polygyny. For example, in 19th century Mormons, polygynous men had higher fitness than monogamous men. This makes sense in regard to the other examples we talked about in mating strategies of males early in the semester. But this was not a good situation for Mormon women. Women in polygynous mating situations had lower fitness than those that were mated monogamously to men. Another area in which males and females tend to differ is related to the desire for sexual variety. Men are much more likely to visit prostitutes, they spend more on porn, and both of these are maladaptive behaviors in the fact that they cost money, and at least the former has the potential for acquiring sexually transmitted diseases. And these can both negatively influence the mate of this individual if it's taking money out of the family's pocket, or the threat of spread of sexually transmitted diseases to the female. So let's look at some of the data to support some of these suppositions. Males are more likely to desire more mates across different time periods in their life. So if you look at the top line here, you can see going from the number of partners they have once they start the sexual phase of their life, increasing rapidly to an expectation throughout their life of having around 18 sexual partners. Females, on the other hand, for the same period of time, have a much slower increase in the rate of gaining sexual partners, and on average are expecting to have about 5 sexual partners throughout their life. What about the length of a relationship and the likelihood of copulation? Well, that also differs between the genders. So again, the male is represented in the orange line here on top. Let's move from the right to the left. So after just 1 hour to 1 day, both the males and the females believe that there's a very low likelihood of intercourse. The males have a little bit hope in that regard, but they will agree that it's unlikely. However, after 1 week, we see a big difference. Now the males feel like they've at least got some chance, but the female perception is still in the very low range. And from there, it drastically differs, where after 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, the males are feeling that it's likely to very likely, and longer time frames, the males think it's very likely. But the females don't think that it's hardly likely at all until about 6 months. And then it begins to increase to the likely to very highly likely. So you can see there's a big difference between male and female expectations. Here's an interesting study. Males are more likely to agree to casual sex, and how this was tested in a study on a college campus. Attractive male and female models were told to approach students on campus of the opposite sex and to just simply offer casual sex. And in this study, 75% of the males accepted this offer and 0% of the females accepted the offer. Now, there are a couple of reasons why the females might be more hesitant. We've talked about the fact that they're just, in general, throughout the animal kingdom, more choosy. But there's also some concerns that females may have that males may not have. For example, the females may be worried about the potential for violence in this situation, or the potential for pregnancy. Well, the study followed up with these potentials by females being approached by other females, and women that were lesbian showed the same hesitancy for casual sex. So it's not a fear of pregnancy or injury. It's basically getting at just this natural, more choosiness and more wariness that females have. More data to show that both sexes show conditional strategies associated with the nature of a relationship. So if you think about what minimum acceptance of intelligence you will have of a partner of the opposite sex under different circumstances. Well, for a date, males and females are pretty close. As long as someone is about half as intelligent as you, then you're willing to date those individuals. But the intelligent level has to increase kind of linearly for females, going from casual sex to steady date to a marriage partner. When you get up to steady date and a marriage partner, both males and females are very similar in that regard. They want a fairly intelligent individual to be paired with for an extended time period. But what's most interesting here is if you look at the casual sex, the male's expectation of their partner actually drops. They're much more willing to have sex with just anybody of any intelligence in casual sex. But females, again, are still showing more selectivity. A big area of potential sexual conflict is associated with extramarital affairs. And in humans, both sexes do pursue this option. And there's studies to indicate that this could be driven in males by the evolutionary expectation of extra fitness, and from females to get better options for future offspring and the offspring that they have. And this fits with regard to what we talked about, the benefits of to males and females of extra-pair copulation in other animals. Studies of males show that males are less likely to pursue extra-pair copulation if the result would negatively affect their own dependent offspring that they already have in their mated relationship. So more dependence, less extra-pair copulation. Both sexes also show jealousy, but the reason why jealousy is shown in males and females differs. The context in which male jealousy is shown is the thought of their partner copulating with another man is disturbing to them. And in an evolutionary context, this makes sense because this is associated with the risk of paternity loss. And if you look at modern populations, female adultery is criminal in many societies. In the U.S., pregnant women are 2 times at risk of domestic assault in situations where males suspect cuckoldry. where the males feel like they are not the father of the offspring that the woman is carrying. Female jealousy, however, is driven by the thought of the partner establishing an emotional relationship with another woman. The evolutionary context for this is the potential risk of losing him as a provider for her own offspring. Let's now turn to the topic of coercive sex or rape. One view of rape is that males rape women as a means of control and dominance. Well, if this is the case, then the dominant females should be the key targets of rapists. But the data actually show that younger, poor women are the primary victims of rape. So an alternative view is that rape is an adaptive byproduct of past selection as a conditional strategy in which low-ranking males attempt to gain some fitness. And this is what we saw in other species. There are males that are subordinate that try to sneak copulations here and there, just trying to get some fitness. But let me be clear. If this is the evolutionary context of rape in humans, this does not condone the behavior. And it should not be extrapolated to say that rape should be an excused behavior in males. So there is evidence that rape is a conditional strategy in males. Well, is this effective? Studies have shown that conception is more common with rape than consensual sex, so it could be an avenue for fitness. And as I mentioned, rapists often target women of higher fertility, not women of higher social status. So here, if you look at the female population as far as age distribution, shown by the green line, the purple line indicates rape victims, which are far younger than the general availability of women in the population. And again, these are the women that would be most fertile, but also less likely to be the women that are the most dominant socially or politically. Those would likely be the older women. So this is arguing for more of an evolutionary context of rape, which again just gives us information to try to understand the motivations and the likely target population for rape, which may give us at least some capability to understand the context to try to prevent this behavior in human populations. Lastly, I want to talk about parental care. Do humans provide or withhold parental care in an adaptive manner, similar to what we discussed earlier? Well, historically, single women were very unlikely to be able to successfully raise a child on their own. And even if they were successful, it could lower their potential lifetime reproductive success by lowering their potential to get married. So has this pattern influenced the likelihood of abortion? Well, the data show that young single women are more likely to abort a pregnancy and less likely to do so late in life. And for married women, the pattern is absolutely the reverse. So early in life, married women are less likely to abort a pregnancy, but late in life are more likely to. This makes sense given the probability of single mothers and their likelihood to marry. So you can see here that there's a positive relationship with the probability to abort a pregnancy early in life and the probability of future marriage. So single mothers without kids are more likely to get married in the future, and that may be one of the things that's driving this pattern. If you look at the behavior of step-parents to their stepchildren, you see that stepchildren are less likely to get financial help from their stepfather. So here we look at the odds of receiving money for college. If you're a genetic child of your current mate, then that individual has a very strong likelihood of getting money from dad. If you look at the rate of the genetic child from a previous mate, that's basically establishing the baseline of 1 here. You're less likely to get money if you're that genetic child than if you're cohabitating with your father and your mother. But you still have a higher probability of getting money from dad than in the situation from stepchildren with the current mate or the stepchild from the previous mate. This makes sense from the perspective of a parent trying to increase its fitness by increasing the chance of success of their offspring. But I don't want to give you the impression here that this is just associated with stepfathers showing this discriminatory behavior. Similar patterns are seen for stepmothers. And this makes sense for why we have fairy tales about evil stepmothers and evil stepfathers. The data actually show that humans do show preferential treatment to their genetic offspring and not their step offspring. Unfortunately, stepchildren are also more likely to suffer abuse, especially when they're very young. So if you look at the victims of child abuse, when there are two natural parents around, it's a very low rate. But when there's one natural and one step parent, it's very high, especially for the youngest stepchildren. And again, I don't want to give the wrong impression. These are the general trends seen in a variety of countries. If you were adopted or you know someone adopted, that doesn't guarantee that they're going to have a horrible existence and be mistreated by their step-parents. But it does show that there is the potential evolutionary inertia associated with withholding proper parental care in certain circumstances. And this is something that we may be able to change with education. So in review, human behavioral ecology is influenced both by evolutionary history and modern cultural influences. And while critics dispute the influence of evolution, I think this is a very narrow point of view, and obviously there should be incorporation of both points of view. We then talked about various topics of behavioral ecology, including the nature of philanthropy, which might be better referred to as a form of social reciprocal altruism in humans. We talked about adaptive mate choice, in which males tend to prefer traits in females associated with signs of fertility, and females show preference for traits associated with male quality, health, genetics, but also social status, and they tend to put a higher emphasis on traits associated with social status. Both males and females do show conditional mating strategies, so positive assortative mating, and males do show coercive sex or rape. We talked about the potential for sexual conflict between males and females, so that males and females have different perspectives on the number of mates, choosiness. EPC is seen in both males and females, but they have different potential evolutionary drivers for these behaviors. Males driven by quantity and females again driven by quality. We talked about the potential for sexual conflict with regard to jealousy and how jealousy is driven by different threats to fitness in both male and female. So males are jealous because they think that they could be losing paternity, and females are afraid of losing the resources associated with their mate and how that could negatively infect their offspring. And finally, we talked about parental care decisions, and we determined that the degree of relatedness does influence the degree of parental care shown in human populations.